Good afternoon, and welcome to today's webinar, Don't Stress the Stress, which we thought was particularly fitting given the fact that it is election day and many of us are just feeling a tad stressed. My name is Monica Bryant, and I am the Chief Operating Officer for Triage Cancer. And just a quick housekeeping items before we get into the heart of the topic today. All callers will be muted for the duration of the webinar. If you have any questions or technical problems, please type them in the chat box to the side of your screen. This webinar is being recorded and will be available for viewing on our website, triagecancer.org. At the end of this webinar, you'll be redirected to a survey. Please take a few moments to fill it out and let us know what you think about today's session. We really do value your feedback. For those of you who aren't aware, Triage Cancer is a national nonprofit organization that provides information and resources on all types of cancer survivorship issues. And we do this in a couple of different ways. First, we host a speakers bureau of experts in all types of cancer survivorship issues available to organizations putting on an educational event. You can read all of our speakers' bios and request a speaker on our website. We also participate and host events all over the country for patients, survivors, caregivers, advocates, and healthcare professionals. Of course, we also host webinars, and recordings of all of our past webinars are available on our website, and we're also very proud to say that most of our 2017 schedule is now available at triagecancer.org/webinars. So definitely take a look at those and sign up for any that pique your interest. And finally, we have a plethora of online resources and tools available for free. So for example, we have charts of state laws on employment, disability, and health-related issues. We have quick guides on various topics such as employment, finances, privacy, clinical trials, and all of these quick guides are designed to be a snapshot of a particular topic, and they're available for free download on our site. And then finally, we have an educational blog and an e-newsletter where we post late-breaking news about cancer-related legal issues and other happenings around the cancer community. So please feel free to check out any or all of those resources, and hopefully you'll find them useful. Now, we would be remiss to move forward without taking a moment to acknowledge our 2016 webinar supporter. We're able to provide these webinars with these outstanding speakers for free thanks to supporters like Science 37. Science 37's mission is to accelerate biomedical research to help patients who are waiting for cures. And they're transforming clinical research by simplifying trial participation and connecting patients to the world's best scientists no matter where they live. So for more information about Science 37 and all that they provide, please visit science37.com. Now, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce Dr. Fauzi today. Dr. Fauzi received her master's degree in oncology nursing and her PhD from UCLA School of Nursing. She was named one of the 60 most influential graduates in the UCLA School of Nursing 60th Anniversary magazine. And she's been working with cancer patients for over 40 years. And she's always been really interested in the importance of psychosocial issues faced by patients and family members. She has participated in landmark research demonstrating that short-term structured interventions can really help newly diagnosed cancer patients to cope more effectively and to feel better emotionally. And I have to say, at the end of every single one of her stress lectures, I always feel better about the state of affairs of the world. So I hope you do too. So most importantly to Triage Cancer, she serves as our board president, and we have to thank her for serving in that role as well. So without further delay, I'm delighted to turn it over to Dr. Fauzi, and I hope that you all find this as wonderful as I generally do. So Dr. Fauzi?
Thank you so much, Monica, and I am delighted to be here, and welcome to all of our listeners as well. Again, as Monica said, it's election day, and this lecture is pertinent to everyone, regardless if you're a healthcare giver, a survivor, an advocate, whatever. it's valuable to every single human being on the planet. So hopefully it will be really helpful to you too, not only because it's election day, but because we have some holidays coming up, which can also be very stressful. And I use this information and these techniques every day in my own life and find them tremendously helpful and valuable. Hope you do too. So just to start out with, just to give you an overview of how we're actually going to approach this topic, I'm going to actually define what stress is, because if I asked you what it was, I might get a number of different definitions. So as long as we're on the same page, we can talk about it. Then I'm going to present to you a theoretical biopsychosocial model to help you understand how all of the different variables of stress come together. And then finally, the most important, what you can actually do about it to make it manageable and less stressful in your life. So let's start with the definitions. There's actually the stress stimulus. This is a particularly distressing situation or an event, and we actually should be calling that the stressor. Then there are the responses, and we all respond differently and on different levels. First of all, there's the behavioral and cognitive level, which we call coping. Then the psychological and emotional level, which we call affective state. And then finally, and most importantly for our health, the physiological responses, which are modulated or are caused in our body by our nervous system, our endocrine system, and our immune system, which are really all one system that works together. All right, so let's go on and I'll explain all of that as we go along. It will become much clearer. So the first thing you have to understand is even though I'm presenting this in an ABC step-by-step manner, it's not really linear. It's something that happens with a lot of feedback and it's ongoing all of the time. But to understand a very complex system, it's important to understand what the basic steps of it are. We know what the stressor is now. It's the stressful situation or event that we're talking about. It hasn't been so far back in man's evolutionary past that the major stressor in our life was making sure that we got food to eat. If we didn't get food to eat, we wouldn't survive. So this is actually showing the caveman running after the roadrunner or the chicken or whatever that may be, and entitled the first fast food. But again, if he didn't catch that bird to eat, then he would be weaker and not be able to perhaps catch the next prey that came by. So the major stressor in his life required a physical reaction. He had to be able to pick up that heavy club and run fast after that animal in order to get his food. The second major stressor at that point was to make sure he didn't become food. So again, it was important to be able to run fast enough to get away from anything that was chasing him. Again, a response that required a physical response to what was going on. It hasn't been until really the 1960s, very much modern day, that scientists began to think about what our modern day stressors might be, as opposed to running after our food or away from a bear. And this was the very first attempt at that. It came out in the 1960s by two scientists called Holmes and Ray. And you can actually see updated versions of this in various, magazines, Cosmopolitan or Vanity Fair or whatever. I like to look at this very first one because this was, in fact, the first one that came out. And what this did was it listed a number of major life events that occur in many people's lives, and it gave them point values. So the higher the point value, the more stressful it is. It's important to look at this list, though, and see that there are a considerable number of things that might not be considered bad. Something like outstanding personal achievement, beginning or end of school, holidays, weddings, and so forth. But so it's showing you that even things that have a positive connotation can, in fact, also be stressful. The funniest one on this one is if you look at mortgages, I think it's 37 and 20. So a mortgage over $10,000 is worth 35 or 31 stress points, and under $10,000 is only worth 17 stress points. Definitely has been changed as time has gone on. But it has been even more recently that we have come to realize that it isn't the major big events that happen once in a while in our lives that are causing us the most stress responses in our lives. It's actually the everyday chronic stressors that we have to deal with. The little hassles become big stresses. Do you have children to take care of? Do you have bills to pay? Is your car working properly? Did you forget to go to the market? Did you forget to make your kids lunch? Did your car break down on the way to work? Did your boss yell at you? Do you have impossible deadlines? All of the things that we, in fact, have to deal with on an everyday basis are the things that actually become the chronic stressors in our life that will then, in turn, cause us to have major problems. So how does that work? Well, once you have a stressor that you're talking about, then there are mediators. Not everybody is going to react to the same stressor the same way. And mediators are things like how much money and how much education you may have, whether you're male or female, are you old or young, your ethnicity, and perhaps your cultural background will have you react differently. How much social support do you have? And interestingly enough, previous experience with difficult situations and coping outcomes, not intuitively, it is people who have had a great deal of stress and difficult situations in their lives, yet have learned how to cope effectively, are the ones who, in fact, continue to cope more effectively. If you've had a lovely, unstressful life without a lot of problems and difficulties, once you are, in fact, faced with a big stressor, you may have more trouble adjusting to it and coping with it than somebody who's had more experience with it. So the next thing we need to talk about, which is incredibly important, is something called cognitive appraisal. And cognition is anything that goes on inside your head. And there are three aspects to cognitive appraisal: primary, secondary, and reappraisal. And what does that mean? Primary appraisal has three components. So if you look at a particular situation, the first appraisal could be it's irrelevant to you. In other words, who cares? Something happened in Sri Lanka, but it has no impact on you or your life. So we don't really care about that right now. The second was, is it something really positive? You just got a giant raise and you were looking for it and you were really happy, so that makes you feel happy. Yippee is the response. And that's not what we're really concerned with with this topic of this discussion either. What we're most concerned with is when you actually have a primary cognitive appraisal of a stressor that's negative or stressful. It's that Houston, we have a problem scenario. And in that case, a harm or a loss has either occurred and or a harm or a loss is threatened. You're talking to my cancer survivors, when they get their first diagnosis of cancer, the harm or loss has already occurred. It's their perception of good health and perhaps even their perception of immortality, which many of us often go through life with as long as we possibly can. And the harm or loss that is threatened may be, in fact, their health and perhaps their life in the long run. Okay? So if we're talking about cancer in particular, you should, in fact, have a primary cognitive appraisal that says this is negative, this is stressful. That's appropriate. But there can be differences in cognitive appraisal, again, depending upon some of those mediators we just talked about. So I love this slide. This is the same house. The first diagram shows the house as you may see it, how your buyer may see it. Third one is how your lender may see it. The fourth one is how your tax appraiser or your appraiser may see it. And then, unfortunately, how your tax assessor may see it. So we're going to be coming back to this slide, but this is the same house. I'm going to cognitively appraise differently depending upon who you are and your perspective of the situation. Secondary cognitive appraisal is really what we call positive attitude in a nutshell. And if you leave today with nothing else, please understand this. This is what positive attitude is. The concept of positive attitude has been terribly twisted and turned and misapplied in the literature and in the popular news and so forth, and has really caused people a lot of guilt and grief and trouble. Positive attitude is the belief that one or more options are available for whatever your particular problem is, and that also the belief that one or more of those options will be successful. That's it. That's a positive attitude. Doesn't mean that you have to be happy and smiling and upbeat all the time. In fact, if you show me somebody who's happy and smiling and upbeat all the time, I have to show you somebody who probably needs medication, because that's not normal. Life is a series of ups and downs, happies and sads, and that's all normal and appropriate. But again, positive attitude, the belief that there are options, and that one or more of those options will be successful for your particular problem. And then there's reappraisal, and this is the reevaluation of a particular stressor at a new point in time. And this may be affected by new events, new information, or a change in your attitude or perception of what's going on. And again, it can occur very quickly in a few seconds, or after longer periods of time that could be minutes, hours, or even years. Again, showing that this is not a completely linear process, so it has lots of feedback and updates to it, which is actually good because you can learn to change your appraisal. So the next part of this model is what we call coping, which is what you actually can do about the situation or the stressor that you're talking about. Basically, there's two categories of coping. There's effective, and that's what works in a given situation, or ineffective, what doesn't work in a given situation. A particular coping method or behavior may or may be effective in one situation, but not in another. So it's important to focus the coping method on the particular stressor or situation. This will become clearer in a few minutes. So when we're talking about effective coping methods, we have two categories. The first is called active behavioral. It's all of the things that you actually do to help you solve your problems and to make you feel better. And because you have a plan, you will feel better in the short term, and because they actually may in fact solve some of your problems, you will feel better in the long term. So this is the kind of behavioral coping, or the kind of coping that we want people to use, active behavioral coping. So here's an example. How can I feel better, Dr. Soup? You should stop drinking, overeating, staying out late, and you should start exercising vigorously. There's always a catch to feeling better, isn't there? Well, there is in fact. It's called active behavioral coping. So then there's also active cognitive coping. And again, cognitive is what goes on inside your head. So it's all of the thoughts and mental techniques that can help to solve your problems and or make you feel better. And again, these are effective in both the short and the long term because they, again, give you a plan. They can be immediately soothing to your soul and your mind and your brain. And because they're focused on solving your problems, they will help make you feel better in the long term. Again, another kind of coping technique that we want you to employ. So what are examples of active cognitive coping? So there's accepting the seriousness of a problem, but not automatically accepting a negative outcome. Looking for ways in which you are better off than others. Assume that there are options and look for them, which again is our positive attitude. Using the situation as a challenge and an opportunity for positive change. And very important is to determine what is important in your life and to focus on this. Oftentimes, a cancer diagnosis or any kind of a diagnosis of a serious health problem will help people put their lives in perspective. Things that they were, in fact, worried about in the past don't seem quite as important to them once they're actually focusing on their health and their life and their future. And these are my favorites. There's several philosophies of life, which I fully encourage. The Pollyanna, the glass is half full, or there is a silver lining to every storm cloud, or when a door closes, there's always an open window. Take your choice. Now, a good example of this is what's going on in all of our lives today. So the current lead up to today's general election has been incredibly stressful for all of us, regardless of your political persuasion or party affiliation. But there have been silver linings. For example, the topic of sexual assault has been placed front and center in our national awareness. This is an important issue for everyone, and talking about it is actually a good thing. It's a silver lining. We're also spending a lot of time talking about our Constitution. And in essence, we're all getting a valuable review of our democracy and how it works. Again, this is a good thing. Okay? So we've talked about effective coping methods, which were the active behavioral and the active cognitive. Now we're going to talk about ineffective coping methods. And the researchers are pretty much just dumped everything into one category, and they call it avoidance coping. So these are both the behaviors and the mental activities that may make you feel better in the short term. Interesting. But they're not focused on solving the problem that's making you feel bad. Therefore, they will not make you feel better in the long term because you may feel better in the short term, but in the long term, you're still stuck with the original problem, the original stressor. I realize it's a little hard to see, but here's an example of denying the existence or seriousness of a problem. The tiger, who I believe is Hobbes, talking to Calvin, aren't you supposed to be doing your homework? And Calvin says, I'm pretty sure the assignment was optional. And the tiger says, denial springs eternal. And the little boy says, it's not denial. I'm just very selective about the reality I accept. Then there's things like smoking or inappropriate rationalizations, which are also examples of avoidance coping. The one policeman says to the other, cigarettes are destroying your health. And the smoking one says, I hate to admit it, but you're right. And it's time I made a drastic decision. Oh, you're going to quit puffing cigarettes? Heck no. I'm going to start popping vitamins. I don't think it actually works that way. So some other examples of avoidance coping are keeping all your thoughts and feelings to yourself. And this is often a very culturally modulated coping technique. There are a number of cultures where it is not part of their culture to talk about their problems. You keep it to yourself, you deal with it yourself. It's sort of like you don't air your dirty laundry or your problems to other people. But that is not a good thing when you're talking about cancer or any other health problem. It's important to be able to talk to others, at least one person, to tell them how you're feeling for real, and let them know, let all of those emotions out rather than keeping them bottled up inside. Number 5 is oversleeping and overeating, and I will admit that those are probably my favorite examples of avoidance coping. 6, abuse of drugs. This can be street drugs, prescription medications, or alcohol. Okay, doing something to numb the pain of what you're going through is not actually a way of dealing with the actual problem. Passiveness, waiting until the problem goes away. Many of my patients over the years have, when they've gotten a lump or a bump somewhere, have said, well, maybe it's just a swollen lymph node, maybe it'll go away eventually, then wait too long to come in before getting a proper diagnosis. And we all know that early diagnosis is the key to good health care and better outcomes. And then constant daydreaming about better times to the exclusion of effective coping. And many times I will sit with my patients, especially ones who have advanced disease, and we'll talk about their lives and what they liked about their lives and didn't like, and reviewing the good times and so forth. And that's not a bad coping technique. But if that's all you're doing, to the exclusion of doing any effective coping to really try to solve the problem that you're immediately facing, then it's an example of avoidance coping, and it's ineffective. And then constant criticism without trying to solve the problem. If you have something to say, then you need to come up, you can identify a problem, but you also need to try to come up with some solutions rather than just complaining about the problem. So again, examples of coping we don't encourage. So now we've gone through the stressor, the mediators, the cognitive appraisal, and the coping. And next comes the psychological response, or the affective state. So what are those? So there's positive psychological responses, and here positive means good. And these are expected as a result of a positive appraisal of the situation. Like I said, you've just been given the promotion and the raise that you were always looking for, and it's really exciting. Okay, you're going to feel good. That's normal and appropriate. However, we would hope and expect to see a positive psychological response when there has been a negative appraisal initially, but then effective coping has been implemented. In other words, you have solved or improved the situation in some way, so you don't feel bad anymore and you feel better. And examples of positive psychological responses are listed here: happiness, contentment, hope, faith, courage, determination, fighting spirit, mastery, and control. And I've listed these because these are the ones that have often been used in the research literature in researching all of these particular types of topics. But there are many other ones. But basically, anything that makes you feel good or happy, these are the kinds of positive psychological responses we want you to have as often as possible. Then there are the negative psychological responses. And these are negative psychological responses are the short-term result of a negative or stressful appraisal in a situation. For instance, you have just been given a diagnosis of cancer. However, they can be appropriate and adaptive if they're used as a motivator for effective coping, be it active behavioral and or active cognitive coping. So again, if you get a diagnosis of cancer, you are entitled to feel terrible. You are entitled to be angry, you're scared, distressed, anxious, whatever. That's appropriate, and in fact, you should feel that way, but you're not required to stay that way. Those should only be short-term responses or short-term feelings. But if you have employed appropriate effective coping, hopefully you will feel better and the negative psychological responses will go away. So what kind of responses are we talking about? So negative psychological responses are also expected as if you had a negative appraisal as an example, a diagnosis of cancer, but no effective coping has been implemented, or the coping techniques that you're using are ineffective. They are inappropriate and maladaptive, meaning that you got a diagnosis of cancer, you were entitled to feel bad, but you didn't do anything to make it better. So you are still feeling bad, and that's what we're very much concerned about. So examples of negative psychological responses are things like anxiety, depression, anger, helplessness or a lack of control, hopelessness, sadness, and fear. Again, appropriate in stressful appraisals of truly stressful situations, but again, you are not required to stay this way. So all of those things, A through E, then will actually result in a physiological response in your body. As I said, modulated by your nervous system, your endocrine system, which are your hormones, and your immune system. So these are some of the chemicals that have been identified as part of that stress response in your body. It's not important to remember these names or to actually even understand how they work. Some people on this webinar may have a science background or a healthcare background and understand some of these, but it's not really important for you either as a healthcare provider or as a healthcare receiver to understand all of these concepts. What is important is that you understand their net effect, which the next slide shows you. So the acute physiological manifestations of the neuroendocrine responses are the fight or flight responses. These are appropriate. This is running after the chicken or away from the bear, or more importantly in modern day situations, or if you're suddenly cut off by a car on the freeway and you have to swerve to avoid a collision. All of that is appropriate. So what happens? All of these things, your heart rate goes up, your breathing goes up, there's more blood to your skeletal muscles to help them to react faster. All of these things happen to make you more available or more likely to be able to fight if you need to or flee if you need to. And in fact, there is a healthy immune response. So if in the fact that you actually got injured, you got caught by the bear or you got hurt in a traffic accident, you actually have an immune response that is heightened to help you respond to infection or so forth to help you be better. All of this is good. These are the kinds of things we want. But what happens if you are pouring out these same chemicals listed on the previous page all the time? 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. What happens is the system starts to break down, and you in fact end up with illness and disease. So all of those chemicals that were helping you to begin with, when you're constantly pumping them into your body, they end up causing these kinds of problems. Headaches, backaches, sleep disorders, fatigue, pain, depression, heart disease, type 2 diabetes, gastrointestinal disorders, hypertension or high blood pressure, even sexual dysfunction. And even most important to many of us is lowered immunity, where before you had enhanced immunity, now it's going to be lowered when you have chronic stress in your life and chronic release of these neuroendocrine chemicals. So again, it's a little kind of technical, but this is incredibly important. When you have this kind of lowered immunity, you get a number of responses. So there's an overexpression of these pro-inflammatory, meaning there's lots more inflammation, cytokines, chemokines, and prostaglandins. Again, you don't need to know exactly what those are. You just need to know that they can cause structural damage to your immune cells, which in turn limit the ability to detect and eliminate foreign microorganisms, which may make you more prone to infectious type diseases. But it also leads to interference with the mechanisms that normally detect and arrest aberrant cell growth. In other words, cancer. So this lowered immunity can lead to the development of cancer, or cancer initiation, the growth of cancer or cancer promotion, and the spread of cancer or cancer metastases. This is information that we've only been able to come up with in the last couple of years, but it really highlights how important many of us in the field have felt stress is to our overall health for many, many, many years. Now we have the science to back it up. So what's the takeaway for this? So it's basically saying that the cellular manifestation of chronic stress is inflammation, and you might, in fact, be hearing a lot about inflammation now, even on the TV. So chronic inflammation represents a failure of normal host mechanisms and is associated in the initiation, promotion, and progression or metastasis of cancer. And estimates suggest that 25% or a quarter of all cancers are associated with chronic inflammations of broad origin. Now, that includes that broad origin means things beyond just stress, but stress is something that we, in fact, can have control over, where we might not have control over some of the environmental inflammatory things that are happening in our lives. And chronic inflammation is specifically linked to the following kinds of cancers: esophageal, GI, colorectal, bladder, ovarian, epithelium or skin cancers, and pancreatic cancer. Okay? So now that you hopefully have a slightly better understanding of what a stressor is and how your body responds to stress on a behavioral and a physiological and immunological level, let's talk about now what you can actually do about that. So there's two components to this. First is stress awareness, and then some actual management techniques. So it's important to be able to understand what your personal sources of stress are. Everybody listening to this webinar has very different sources of stress. So it's important for you to understand which are your biggest stressors. And then to identify your personal reactions to stresses, to these stressors. How do you react on a physiological level, on a psychological level, or a behavioral level? For instance, do you get upset? Do you get angry, or do you get sad? Behaviorally, do you go home and crawl under the covers, or do you go out and try to, punch somebody out, or do you go out and exercise? What do you do in response to the stressors in your life? Now, Triage Cancer has actually developed a stress monitor that we will have online when this webinar is up in about a week, that you can actually download and use to do your own stress monitoring or stress awareness assessment that will help you understand what it is we're talking about here. Okay, so once you understand what your major stressors are, then it's important to understand what you can do about that. And there are 4 basic techniques. The first thing you want to do is try to eliminate the source of a stressor via problem solving. So I particularly like this technique. The king comes down and asks the wizards, do you have anything to relieve stress? Certainly. How about this, says the wizard. And the king is poofed into another dimension from where he says, it's not working. And the wizard is going, for you, maybe. Isn't there somebody in your life you'd like to be able to do that to? Well, I have a few. Anyway, then if you can't actually eliminate it, maybe you can modify it in some way to make it less stressful via problem solving. And some solutions are just very simple, like this, a his and hers, this way and that way, toilet paper set. So I've been talking about problem solving, and we all problem solve every single day. But it's really important to go through the steps of problem solving if you're in fact trying to modify a major stressor in your life. So the first thing you want to do is you want to relax. Many of us multitask. We're all doing and thinking many, many different things at the same time. But it's important, if you're really going to do this seriously, is to put all of that aside. Go someplace where it's quiet and it's calm. Sit in a comfortable chair, maybe with some pen and paper in front of you. Take a couple of deep breaths and really clear your mind and think about what the problem is. And then really identify the problem. If I ask you what your problem is and you say, I'm anxious, is that really your problem? No, anxiety is not your problem. Anxiety is a manifestation or a physical emotional response or psychological response to the problem. So it's important to identify what is the real problem, okay? Are you having trouble on the freeway commuting to work? Do you have a boss who is a problem, who doesn't give you the attention or the credit that you deserve? You're having trouble with your health insurance. What is the real problem that's causing you a major amount of stress? And break it down to its smallest component to be able to deal with it. Then you want to brainstorm for some possible solutions. And my favorite example of this is the movie 9 to 5 with Bette Midler and a few other important people in it. Jane Fonda, I think, was the other one of the others. And there's a scene in that movie where they're all imagining what they could do to their impossible boss. And there's some very, very funny scenarios in that, none of which are really feasible or legal for that matter. But the process of brainstorming in and of itself can be stress-reducing. So if you have a problem, you can sit there. Nobody needs to know what you're thinking about. You can come up with the most ridiculous, absurd, illegal types of things possible to that possible solution, but also try to come up with some that might actually be feasible and write them down. Make sure you throw the paper away or destroy it when you're done. But then select one of those solutions for the real problem and implement it and see if the situation is better. And if it works, you celebrate. If not, you go back to steps 3 and 4, coming up with more possible solutions and implementing them and seeing if they work, and you keep on trying. So either you've solved the problem or you come to the realization that it's not solvable or modifiable and you're still stuck with it as is. So then you move on to the next technique. Again, we're back to the house. You can change your attitude toward, perception of, or cognitive appraisal of a stressor. You can choose to do this. Now, this is obviously easier to do in simpler or not terribly important situations, but sometimes even something as serious as a diagnosis of cancer can be reappraised. And once you get more information about what is your particular diagnosis, what is your prognosis, what options are available, and so forth. So you may be looking at the situation like your tax appraiser, and it may be inappropriate to look at it like your tax assessor, but maybe you can take it over to the lender slide. You can downward appraise it in terms of its stress level to you. What are some ways you can actually do that? You can search for negative thinking. Have I correctly identified what's bothering me? Am I thinking in all or nothing terms? Am I assuming every situation is the same? This is something I see with a lot of patients. They say, I have a diagnosis of breast cancer and my sister-in-law died of breast cancer. Well, it may have been a different time. She may not have had the treatment options. It may not have even been the same diagnosis of breast cancer at that point. So do not assume that every situation is the same. And do not assume that the worst is going to happen in every situation. Also, am I making unrealistic or unfair comparisons? Do I actually have evidence to support my conclusions? Are my worries worth worrying about? It's sort of like don't sweat the small stuff. And am I blaming myself for something beyond my control? I have a lot of patients who come to me and feel very guilty about having developed cancer. And I tell them, if you had known that you had done A, B, C, and D all of your life, and it was going to cause you cancer, and then you consciously chose to do all of those things anyway, well, then you may have some basis for some blame or guilt. But we don't know that. Our cancer is so complex and so multifaceted, and our lives are so complex and multifaceted, we can't blame ourselves for everything that happens to us. A lot of things are not beyond our control. So you can replace some of that negative thinking with positive affirmation. And I know this may seem simplistic, but sometimes just telling yourself these things and saying these things over and over a couple of times a day actually helps. I am not to blame for my illness. I can deal with my problems. And a subgroup of that is I can deal with all my problems, but not all at once. I can break it down into manageable tasks. I can learn to prioritize. I am learning to let unimportant things go. I am learning not to worry about things I cannot control. I am eager to use the situation as an opportunity and challenge to make my life better. And my favorite is I both like and love myself. Simple things to do. So I'm also going to give you some situational examples of changing cognitive appraisal that are very pertinent to patients or survivors of cancer or disease, and also to healthcare providers and caregivers. So I often get asked about hope, and I frequently say, well, I'm frequently told I don't want to give my patients false hope. Well, in my belief system, there is no such thing as false hope. However, what is hoped for probably will and should change over time. If you get a diagnosis of an illness or disease, the first hope is that there will be a cure or a return to full physical and mental health. The second thing that's hoped for, if you can't actually have that cure, is a good positive adaptation to partial physical and or mental health with really good quality of life. And this can be a long trajectory, but with diminishing yet important and valuable hopes. And what's finally hoped for is an end of life, where all your instrumental business is finished. And instrumental business means you've taken care, all of your important people know what your passwords are to your computer. They know where your wills are. They know where the pink slip to the car is. Your businesses are taken care of, all of those kinds of things. And emotional business is just as important. So if you've had some issues with other people in your life and you want to mend fences, now's a good time to do it. If you want to tell all the people that you really care about them, but you've had a hard time doing that, now's the time to be able to come out and say, I really love you. Conversely, if there's been some real not so nice people in your life and you really want to tell them off, this is also a good opportunity to take care of that, because the chances are you won't be around to have to deal with the consequences. But it can be very, very cathartic in the process. And we also want dignity and pain-free end of life. and in the presence of people who care and who really matter. The second situational example that I want to give you are actual fears or perceptions about the end of life. And there's two aspects to that. One is the actual process of dying, distinct from actually being dead. So the process of dying, again, is the biggest concerns are loss of dignity, pain, and sadness and concerns about leaving loved ones. And I have to tell you that if you don't know about this or you haven't been involved with it before, you need to learn more about palliative and hospice care, which can help tremendously. So just to clarify what those terms are. Palliative care is ongoing treatment with instrumental help with activities of daily living, symptom control, psychological support, and legal, insurance, and religious issues. Then hospice care, and this is the current insurance definition, Medicare definition, is intensive palliative care, including home nursing, because hospice doesn't have to be in a hospital or a place. It is often done at home. But there's no medical cure treatment, meaning that you still may be getting treatment. You could be getting radiation therapy, you could be getting medication, but it's aimed at symptom control, for instance, pain management. It's not actually aimed at curing you or specifically providing longer life, and with a prognosis of less than 6 months. And many people are concerned about, well, what happens if I actually live longer than 6 months? Well, you won't get kicked off hospice, or it can be reassessed, and then you can go off it if you are really doing well and can go back on it again later. But again, what happens is most people don't end up in hospice care until maybe the last one or sometimes a few days before the end of life, sometimes maybe a week or two, but are not getting the value of that care. So what is the value of that care? Well, I think that's explained in a research study that came out in 2010. It was on patients who were diagnosed, their initial diagnosis was advanced. They had metastatic lung cancer, meaning it started in their lungs and it spread throughout their bodies. So one group was standard treatment alone, and the second one was that standard treatment, but along with palliative and hospice care from the very, very, very beginning. So those who got the palliative and hospice care actually experienced better quality of life. They had less depression, far less pain, less nausea, far less worry, and they had increased mobility, meaning they were up and around and moving more. Most of them had opted for less aggressive treatment, and most of them had written do not resuscitate orders with very specific instructions about what their doctors and caregivers should do should they stop breathing. Not only were they had better quality of life with all the things we just mentioned, but they also lived too much longer than the standard treatment group as well, which just goes to show that when you feel better, you're probably going to live longer as well. So getting back to the second component, so that's talking about the process of dying. Let's actually talk about death. There's pretty much only two options. Option one is there is some kind of an afterlife or heaven or whatever you want to call it. And pretty much most people who claim to be experts on this describe it as something beautiful, peaceful, joyful. There's no pain or suffering or sadness. And if you have people who have died before you who you love and care about, you will be joining them. And then in a blink of celestial time, the loved ones you've left behind will join you, so that there will be no sadness about leaving. Well, while you're there, there'll be no sadness about the people you've left behind, because they will, in fact, be joining you very soon. Now, most religions have requirements to get you into this afterlife, and that usually means living a good life, following the rules or tenets of whatever your particular belief system is. I highly promote the platinum rule over the golden rule. The golden rule is treating others as you would like to be treated yourself. But I think for just an added insurance policy, you should follow the platinum rule, and that's where you try to treat other people even better than you would hope to be treated yourself. Pretty much a guarantee to get you into an afterlife. If necessary, and that's where you want to go, repent and atone now so you can get where you want to go. Option two, there is no afterlife. Everything just ends. There is nothing. There's no pain. There's no suffering. There's no sadness. There's no consciousness at all. It just ends. So it's akin to the best, deepest night's sleep you've ever had. You just don't wake up. But the bottom line is that's not bad either. Now, I'm personally hoping for option one, but I can live with the concept of option two until I actually find out which one's for real. Okay, so getting back to our management techniques, So just to review again, we've talked about problem solving to eliminate or modify stressors. We've just been talking a lot about cognitive appraisal, how you can think about things differently. So number 4 is really, really important and very, very practical. You can change the physical reaction to whatever stressor you're experiencing from negative to positive via 2 mechanisms. First, by shutting off the chronic release of those stress hormones that I talked about that cause all the bad problems in your body, and turning on positive neuroendocrine immune responses called endogenous opioids. So what are endogenous opioids? You may have heard the terms endorphins or enkephalins. There's a few others, but those are the ones that seem to be most popular. These are naturally occurring chemicals in the body. They are opiate-like substances, for instance, morphine, which makes them very valuable painkillers. They're antidepressants, and we now know that they actually enhance the immune system. So these are good on so many levels. So how do you actually do that? Let me just give you an example before we get into the rest of the slide. If I'm holding out a bottle of water at arm's length, and I ask you how heavy it is, I would get a number of reactions. Oh, it's 8 ounces, it's 12 ounces, it's 16 ounces. So my response to you would be, it really doesn't matter how heavy it is, because right now, I can hold it out without any trouble. And I can probably hold it for 5, 10, 15 minutes, maybe even an hour. But after that, it's going to start feeling heavier and heavier, even though the actual weight has not changed. What has changed is my ability to actually deal with or cope with holding that bottle of water up, holding that weight up. If you take that and think about the stressors in your same way, there's a lot of stressors in our life that we can deal with for a short period of time. But if we don't actually walk away from them or fix them or turn them off in some way, every now and then they will become overwhelming. They will become way too heavy for us to deal with. And that's when we actually start getting the diseases and the illnesses in our lives. So how can we do this? The first thing to do is shut off the chronic fight or flight responses and or turn on the endogenous opioid release mechanisms. Interestingly enough, the things listed here do both, but it's a choice. You must choose to put down that bottle. You must choose to put down those stressors every now and then and employ other activities and behaviors that will actually be good for you. So here's a list of them. And all of these things are fun and good and happy to do. Exercise. And it doesn't mean you have to run a marathon. It means going out and take a brisk walk on a beautiful fall afternoon day. Or, if you can't get outside, just find a treadmill. Or if you're at work, walk up a couple of flights of stairs, get some deep breathing going. Just a little bit goes a very long way. Laughter. Laughter has been shown to enhance the immune system, and if you're laughing, you can't be sad. So find some funny movies, find Saturday Night Live, find whatever it is that makes you laugh and makes you happy and engage in it. Sex. Who doesn't like sex? Okay? Sex is good for you. Okay? Music. Listening to, singing, or playing. All of it is wonderful. Pets have been shown to be incredible stress reducers and endogenous opioid releasers. So if you don't have a pet and you like animals, whether it's a bird or a parakeet or a dog or a horse or whatever, if you like pets and you can get one, I highly recommend them. Aromatherapy. Scent has a powerful impact on our feelings and emotions. So find the scents that you like and surround them. Go out and buy some flowers at the market on your way home today, or get some essential oils and take a bubble bath. Do something where you can surround yourselves with the scents that you particularly like and enjoy and evoke positive memories. Massage. Getting a good massage, even if it's going and getting a manicure and having them massage your hands and feet. If you can afford a good massage therapist, fantastic. Or maybe you can, negotiate with a partner or a friend or whatever to trade massages, be it neck or whatever, back massages. Acupuncture and acupressure have been around for thousands of years, and science is now showing that these are fantastic for shutting off these fight or flight responses and turning on endogenous opioids. And then the relaxation response, which is something that I employ with all of my patients and use myself. The simplest one is just doing some deep breathing. Whenever you're finding yourself particularly tired or stressed out or even sitting in traffic, just lean back, try to relax all your muscles, take a couple of really deep breaths, inhale, hold it for a moment, exhale as much as you can, and then inhale again. And just do that 3 or 4 times, and you will find yourself already relaxed, turning off those stress chemicals, feeling sharper and clearer-headed, but much happier. I also teach progressive muscle relaxation, and we're hoping to have an downloadable audio version of the exercise that I use on the Triage Cancer website, hopefully by the first of the year, followed by guided imagery. You can fake your brain out. You can tell it that you're someplace else. You can tell it you can say you're on a beach in Hawaii or skiing down a slope in the mountains. Whatever you particularly like and love to do, if you stop and think about that and take yourself to those places, again, it's a way to shut off the chronic fight or flight and to turn on the endogenous opioids. Other techniques are Tai Chi, Reiki, yoga, prayer. All of these have actually had some research behind them to show that they're in fact part of the relaxation response and ways you can change your physical reaction to the stressors in your life. Now, if you think this is an example of the relaxation response, it really isn't. This is a very passive kind of a thing. I enjoy watching TV, but sometimes I'm not always that relaxed by it, especially if I'm watching the news these days, okay? If you really are doing it right, you're going to be like mama. Nothing on my mind, forgetting my problems, relaxing my anxieties, letting go of my tensions, anxieties, responsibilities, concerns, and cares. Mama, it's a lovely day. Come on out. I can't. My soul is undressed. That's pretty much how you should feel after getting a good relaxation response going. So to review, the techniques that are very doable are to eliminate or modify the stressor via problem solving. If you find that that's not working, you can learn to change your attitude toward, perception of, or cognitive appraisal of the stressor. And you can definitely change your reaction, your physical reaction to the stressor from negative to positive without a whole lot of difficulty. So basically, that's the end of my presentation. I want to again remind you that this webinar, along with the references that are listed next, will be available on the Triage Cancer website, hopefully by the end of next week. And we will also have the stress monitors and the stress diary or the stress assessment tool online as well. And there are the references should you need them. And again, there are many other options and opportunities for you to learn more from the Triage Cancer website, which will also be listed there. And now I would like to entertain any questions from anyone via the chat box.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Fauzi. That was absolutely fantastic. I'm not seeing any questions pop up, but I think it has more to do with the fact that you've given people lots to think about than the reality that there isn't any questions. So please know that there are a plethora of ways to connect with Triage Cancer moving forward. And of course, as Dr. Fauzi mentioned, this webinar will be on our website, hopefully by the end of next week. So you can feel free to rewatch it and kind of reabsorb everything that she talked about today. So with that, we're reaching the end of the hour. And I will say that if you haven't gone out and voted yet, please do so. And we hope to see you in 2017 for some of our upcoming webinars. And thank you so much for spending the hour with us. Have a wonderful day, everybody.